The following program is a UNC Charlotte production.
Welcome inside UNC Charlotte. First up in this edition, we'll visit the Department of Mechanical Engineering and Engineering Science to learn more about bioceramics research. This groundbreaking research involves using bioceramics as a drug delivery system in the medical field. How are you aging? Through research, teaching, and community outreach, the faculty at UNC Charlotte's College of Health and Human Services is focused on helping people lead longer, healthier lives. We'll visit with the Department of Kinesiology to learn how to age well. Also in our program, we profile two university researchers who are this year's recipients of one of UNC Charlotte's top honors, the First Citizens Bank Scholars Medal Award. All this and more inside UNC Charlotte. Bioceramics. Have you heard of it? It's a category of biocompatible ceramics used in medical procedures. El-Ghannam is a professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering and Engineering Science. He's researching the use of bioceramics as a drug delivery system to treat cancer.
The bioceramics that I work with has been developed 15 years ago, and I have 2 US patents for this new bioceramics. This bioceramics is a resorbable and biocompatible ceramic. That is, when it is inserted into the body, it does not elicit immunological response, and it helps the cells to produce matrix and tissue. And recently, in the last 10 years, I have geared my research in order to use this bioceramic as a drug delivery system.
So the project with Dr. El-Ghannam, the thought behind it is we can find a way to develop a delivery system that gets very high drug concentrations directly into the cancer without that drug spreading beyond the tumor itself.
So I approached Ian McCaleb and David Ionati, who's also a surgeon at Carolina Medical Center, and we worked together in order to evaluate the ability of the bioceramics loaded with the anti-cancer drug to treat liver cancer.
My role in this is I'm trained as a physiologist and pharmacologist. So we use in vivo animal models of liver cancer and in vitro cell culture models of liver cancer to test how efficacious the different formulations of the SCPC bioceramics are at delivering drugs to treat the cancers.
We have done animal studies, 2 animal studies, and we have done so many cell culture studies, and all have given us very encouraging results.
One of the great advantages of Dr. El-Ghannam and I's working relationship is we were fortunate enough to get a research grant from the North Carolina Biotechnology Center to pursue this work as part of a multi-center research grant. And that grant is coming to completion, and we currently have a grant in submission to the National Institutes of Health to try and develop this project using the doxorubicin, and then hopefully to take this study further from small animal research into larger animal models. And I think this will be a critical step in the translatability of this into human treatment and therapy.
The use of bioceramic as a delivery system required a lot of engineering of the structure of the ceramic and the chemical composition of the ceramic. So in our lab, we do a lot of work in building the crystalline structure of the ceramic. And we manipulate the position of the atoms within the crystal so that this ceramic would be able to bind the anti-cancer drug. So we take the ceramic into many different stages. We prepare the ceramic in the lab. So we start by the raw materials. We go and get the silica, we get the calcium carbonate, we get the raw materials, mix them together, cook them in the furnace to make the ceramic, so it is a bioceramic.
After that, we take the material, grind it to a smaller particle size. We have different sieve meshes where we selected a particular particle sizes. When these particle sizes are selected, we analyze the particles using an electron microscope. That is a device that allows us to go to higher magnifications, normally like 20,000 magnifications of the grains, and then we can see the porous structures and the size of these pores. And when we are happy with these porous particles, we can start using them for loading with drug and then do the drug delivery applications. We have found like 2 ways to control the material for drug delivery applications. Number 1 is the porosity of the ceramic, and number 2 is the faces that the ceramics has at the end. The porosity, we can control them by pressing the ceramic at different levels. And these ceramics are like sponges. They have like big pores and small pores. So what we want with them is that big pores allows the fluids goes all the way inside the ceramic, and small pores, they serve like pockets. So when we load it with drug, the drug normally is all over the material and can be retained in these small pockets. And for the drug delivery application, this is very nice because they have like a longer amount of time to take off from the small pockets to the outside fluids. Also, we have found that the chemical composition of the ceramics, I mean the phases where that this is a compound to, they have an effect also in the retention and the rates of release of the drugs. So we, what we do to control this thing is just make different combinations of different proportions of the silicates and phosphates that we use to prepare the ceramics, and based on that we can get different proportions of the final phases.
We wanted to make this ceramic material serve as a smart material that once the surgeon inserted into the body, it will release the drug in a very controlled fashion, releasing a specific dose hourly for a specific period of time to cause complete eradication of the tumor. Then after the treatment, the surgeon just take the tablet out of the patient and the patient is tumor-free.
This relationship between the university and the medical center, I think, really takes a theoretically very interesting problem and series of projects and provides some really direct translatability to the research. So the studies that we're doing aren't just theoretical drug release kinetics, these are now hands-on translational research into how we can slow and regress cancer progression.
Life expectancy has nearly doubled over the last century. Today, nearly 40 million Americans are 65 and older. That's why aging well is more important than ever. The difference between aging well and growing more frail and less independent with advancing years has a lot to do with our levels of physical activity. UNC Charlotte Associate Professor of Kinesiology Michael Turner studies the impact of physical activity on the aging process. Specifically, he looks at how physical activity affects cardiovascular function.
Really, we want to try and be healthy to try and make sure that the heart can pump well as we get older. Most people would prefer to kind of age gracefully to a point where they're always independent and still living their life free of depending upon other folks. With the heart specifically, when the heart gets thicker and stiffer, it doesn't pump very well, so there's not as much oxygenated blood going to the rest of the body, primarily the brain. It doesn't allow us to function very well as we get older, so we become more dependent on folks to help us out with what seems to be sometimes menial tasks. What we're seeing with some of our research is that right around the second quarter of the lifespan, so somewhere around 20s to early 30s, we see an important time where the heart starts to get thicker if we're not being very healthy, we're not regularly active. We also see it changing also towards like the end of the third quarter of the lifespan. So right around where we expect to see retirement, or just before our retirement age, around 60, we start to see some changes there as well, where there's an acceleration of this aging process with the heart, but activity tends to slow it down a little bit, not as much as we see in the second quarter of the lifespan.
The heart and the musculoskeletal system work together throughout the lifespan. To maintain heart function, it's important to maintain muscle mass as we age. Assistant Professor of Kinesiology Susan Arthur studies the age-associated loss of muscle mass and function known as sarcopenia. Arthur says a number of factors can cause sarcopenia, including lack of necessary nutrients or vitamins in one's diet, chronic inflammation related to aging, decreased protein synthesis within the muscles, and a decrease in the ability of aged muscle to repair itself following injury.
What can be done to prevent the loss of skeletal muscle mass and function is simply moving. The movement with aging can help delay this onset of sarcopenia and the loss of muscle mass and function because they have stronger muscles that can help readily regenerate when exposed to these microtraumas. So the stronger the skeletal muscle contractile apparatus is, the stronger, with aging, the stronger one can recover when exposed to injury. Sarcopenia with the smaller muscle mass and the pain that can be associated with movement, it's a vicious cycle because the less the folks want to move because they feel the pain, the less they're going to move, which is then going to exacerbate the loss of muscle mass because they're not moving. But also skeletal muscle is an important organ that works with other organs such as cardiovascular functions and metabolic functions and maybe even neurological functions. So with poor skeletal muscle mass, that's going to affect cardiovascular problems and can induce metabolic issues. And so there is a high correlation with type 2 diabetes and loss of muscle mass that's associated with sarcopenia.
Associate Professor of Kinesiology Tricia Turner is approaching the musculoskeletal system from the standpoint of orthopedic muscle injury and how seemingly minor injuries can affect the body as a whole.
When you have someone have an acute musculoskeletal pathology, and one of our primary models we look at is the ankle sprain, is unfortunately about probably 55% of folks who have an ankle sprain don't seek any form of treatment for that injury. About 60% of people who develop an ankle sprain or have an ankle sprain develop chronic ankle instability. So they have these chronic symptoms of pain, feeling like the ankle is unstable or it's going to give way. And I think that then changes the activity level of that patient or that person. And those changes in those physical activity levels have negative impacts on things like cardiovascular function. And I think that puts that patient at risk, or at least what we see from a research standpoint. So that initial acute ankle sprain that doesn't get probably treated properly turns into this chronic ankle instability, and that really changes their ability to do activity. And then that negatively influences cardiovascular function, which then unfortunately puts the patient in a really bad overall health situation when it comes to aging.
Through research, teaching, and community outreach, UNC Charlotte's College of Health and Human Services faculty are focused on helping people lead longer, healthier lives. Health assessments, including reliable measurements of body mass index, are available to the campus and greater Charlotte communities.
Here at the university, we have what's called a community testing program. In that community testing program, we do risk assessment. So we do body composition testing, we do aerobic capacity testing. Those two assessments can determine your aerobic fitness and your body composition, so how much fat or muscle you have. So the main equipment that we use is entitled the BOD pod. And the BOD pod is a machine where you get in and it's based on air displacement. So you wear minimal clothing and you get in and it's going to give you a calculation of your percent body fat. And that percent body fat is going to determine if you have a higher risk for diabetes or cardiovascular disease. So we do that testing for body composition for individuals that may want to know the risk assessment or that maybe want to work on a strength training program. So they want to know over time, can they reduce their fat and build up their muscle mass.
To learn more about the community testing program or to schedule an appointment, contact the Department of Kinesiology at 704-687-0874. One of UNC Charlotte's top honors is the First Citizens Bank Scholars Medal Award, given each year to a faculty member at the top of his or her field. This year's dual recipients are Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun in the psychology department, based on their work together in the area of post-traumatic recovery.
They're both very humble, very gracious. They both have a good sense of humor. They're wonderful to work with. They're excellent colleagues.
Meet UNC Charlotte professors of psychology Lawrence Calhoun and Rich Tedeschi, the recipients of the First Citizens Bank Scholars Medal. These two pioneers have collaborated on groundbreaking research on growth from adversity, which has become one of the most researched concepts in the behavioral sciences. Their partnership began nearly 30 years ago, and there are no signs of it ending anytime soon.
Well, this was back in the early 80s, wasn't it?
Yep. My recollection is Rich and I were writing to a conference. We both finished up programs of research on different things, and we were simply conversing about what we were going to do next, and we said, wouldn't it be interesting to find people who've dealt with really bad stuff but have coped really well? And that was sort of the beginning.
One of their biggest contributions was the development of a measuring tool they named the Posttraumatic Growth Inventory. It's a 21-item scale to measure and assess positive outcomes reported by individuals who have gone through traumatic episodes in their lives. It is the most widely used and cited measure of post-traumatic growth and has been translated into roughly 20 languages.
It all seems to have coalesced into these 5 major areas of growth that we've ended up looking at. And, there are changes in how people relate to other people, changes in their spiritual, existential beliefs, a sense of new possibilities in life, new opportunities that wouldn't have been there otherwise, a greater appreciation for their personal strength, and appreciation for life in general.
So because of these studies, the Japanese government even recognize and understand the possibility of the personal growth as a human being. And before that, all of the physicians or psychiatrists or psychologists, we just focus on the negative symptoms. And of course, there is a possible for the personal growth, but until they actually started doing the research, the professionals only focus on the negative symptoms. So they really, really are the icons, and they really change the world, how we look at the trauma.
The pair has published 6 books since 1995, with the latest released earlier this year.
It's called Post-Traumatic Growth in Clinical Practice, and it's written for clinicians, but also for the layperson as well. But the general framework is that the clinician is an expert in many ways, but in other ways is simply a companion.
The core elements of this is listening to people in a way which allows oneself to be changed rather than being intent on changing this other person you're working with.
While their research is extremely complex and can be difficult to comprehend to the non-psychologist, the two men can discuss it in practical terms to illustrate how an individual can experience change or growth while suffering from the effects of trauma.
Even though the suffering may continue in some form, what growth provides is some kind of meaning to the suffering. So it isn't just all in vain, that there's some other aspect to the suffering that people can actually value.
And another point to emphasize is that the experience of transformative growth does not mean that suffering ceases.
Both Tedeschi and Calhoun acknowledge they have been personally affected by their work.
You know, one of the things that I think is so different about the kind of research that we've done is that it's so much part of the understanding of living life well that we can apply to ourselves, and that we, you know, we've been fortunate enough to hit upon a research area that we can really take to heart and use to inform us about how to live our own lives.
And their area of concentration has become acutely relevant in this time and place.
You know, we've been through a time the past 10 years or so in this country where there's been a lot of public attention to trauma because of what's happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so we've got a lot of traumatized people who have returned to this country. And I'm hoping that many of those people who served in the military and their families also derive some benefit from the kinds of things that Lawrence and I have been writing about.
It even comes closer to home than that, Tedeschi explains.
You know, my father was a Marine in World War II, and you know, I learned, he died when I was a kid, but I learned by looking at his records just in recent years that he had post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of his service in the Pacific. In some ways, I've perhaps gotten involved in this work with trauma survivors, and maybe because of him, although I didn't know it very consciously, but there's certainly a link in my life back to that.
At the UNC Charlotte's Center City campus, Diane Ravitch, author of The Death and Life of the Great American School System, spoke at the recent TIAA-CREF lecture series on her criticism of high-stakes testing and the business-driven approach to school reform.
Public education is indeed a cornerstone of any democratic society. It's opened the doors of opportunity for millions of Americans, including me. I'm a graduate of the Houston Public Schools. Public education is a fundamental engine of social progress and social justice. The desegregation movement happened through the public schools. Gender equity happened through the public schools. The inclusion of children with disabilities happened through the public schools. Take them away, and what engine do we have for social change in the future? So I want to talk about the evidence, facts. I like facts. As John Adams said, facts are stubborn things. Ronald Reagan even quoted him, facts are stubborn things. The only tests that have been given over many years are the federal test called the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's called NAEP. So comes the question, is American public education declining, as we so often hear on television? The test scores of white students, black students, Hispanic students, and Asian students are at their highest point in history. Graduation rates are at their highest point in history. But what about our terrible performance on international tests? In the past 50 years, there have been many international tests, and our students typically have scored either in the bottom quartile or about average. But over the past half century, our nation has far surpassed all of the others who had higher test scores in terms of economic growth, military strength, technological innovation, democratic institutions, creativity, whatever measure you want to come up with. We outperform the nations with higher scores. The test scores do not predict anything about the future performance of our economy. What matters most for our economy and our society is not the ability to pick the right bubble on a standardized test, but the creativity, the ingenuity, and the risk-taking that is encouraged by a free society.
Over 1,000 career points, over 1,000 career rebounds, the school's all-time blocks leader and the 2012-13 Atlantic 10 Player of the Year. 49ers senior forward Jennifer Haley has had an incredible career here at Charlotte, a career that Niner Nation or the record books won't soon forget.
She's played like every game is her last. And that's just been fun to see because she's taken advantage of every opportunity she has to be on the court. And that's what you want to see out of your seniors. Some things have just finally clicked with her, at least the coaching that we've given her over the last 2 years. And we worked a lot with her footwork and her positioning. And if you watch her from where she was when we took over to where she is now, she catches the ball so deep. She has great footwork. She knows how to get position. So when she catches it, she's either scoring it or the opponents have to hope she misses it. She wasn't like that last year, you know, and I think that that's finally after just repetition and gaining confidence and learning how to get position. I think that since that's now completely clicked in her, that's made her just a tremendous player here down the stretch of her career. To see a player like her get as many double-doubles as she has over her career and certainly over the season is just a tremendous effort and a tremendous drive to want to be great in all areas of this game, and I think that's what makes her really, really special. Well, you can't count out the character of Jennifer Haley. She's a tough kid with a great heart and just a will to want to be good at a lot of things. And it doesn't mean it's been easy. I mean, it's been difficult for her, certainly for the 5 years she's been here.
The first year when I got here, I didn't actually, you know, play because my grades wasn't where they were supposed to be. But the year that I took off, it kind of, you know, made me sit back and like, you know, get focused on my grades and what I'm supposed to do to get where I want to be.
When I first got here, she didn't say hardly a peep on the court. You know, she worked really hard and everybody followed her example, but now she's become such an energy giver to our team so that if things are going wrong, she gets on people and they listen to Jen, you know, that's for sure. And she understands that this is her team and her last year. And because of all those, you know, feelings and emotions around that, she's not going to let anybody give anything less than their best, same as she does every day.
Thanks once again for joining us. You can see more on the web each day at inside.uncc.edu, and all of our segments are on YouTube. In the meantime, we look forward to seeing you next time right here inside UNC Charlotte.